Hey everybody, Joe Joseph here for thedailySheeple.com, and this is your news shot. And I want to highlight an article that we had at the Daily Sheeple today by the Ron Paul Institute. Government aid makes disasters worse. A lot of people look to the government for help when it comes to disasters. And we've really, it's actually been designed that way for a reason. You know, what's really happened is it's kind of been a twofold thing. You've had the removal of God from society. And I don't just mean like the Christian God. I'm just saying in general, you had a push to get this whole concept of evolution pounded in your head. You know, Darwinism. Darwin, towards the end of his life, knew that Darwinism, or the theory of evolution, just didn't hold up. And he wrote about it. It's called Darwin's Doubt. And that was pushed on society so that people would stop relying on themselves and being spiritual and relying on a higher power through catastrophe. Instead, you go to your government God and you worship the government God and you become subservient to the government God. And that's where socialism started to be pushed on people, and that's where we are today. We are socialists. Think about it. Think about it. Even the most staunch conservative person is a socialist here in the United States. It's forced on you. That's what our society is. It is socialist in nature. It is groupthink. You know, if you do something that's outside the norm, why, you're an outcast. How many people that homeschool have been an outcast? How many people that question the narrative are an outcast? I mean, it's in full force today. Take a look at the censorship that's going on all over social media if you dare question the narrative. I mean, it's unbelievable. Well, the Ron Paul Institute says government aid, or relying on the government God, makes disasters worse. Listen to this. Texans affected by Hurricane Harvey, including my family and me, appreciate the outpouring of support from across the country. President Trump has even pledged to donate $1 million to relief efforts. And these private donations will be much more valuable than as much as $100 billion in federal funds expected to be spent on relief and recovery. Federal disaster assistance hinders effective recovery efforts, while federal insurance subsidies increase the damage caused by natural disasters. It says federal disaster aid has existed since the early years of the Republic. In fact, it was a payment to disaster victims that inspired Davy Crockett's "Not Yours to Give" speech. However, the early federal role was largely limited to sending checks. The federal government didn't become involved in managing disaster relief and recovery until the 20th century. Americans didn't even have a federal agency dedicated solely to disaster relief until 1979, when President Jimmy Carter created FEMA by executive order. Yet Americans somehow managed to rebuild after natural disasters before 1979. For example, the people of Galveston, Texas, successfully rebuilt the city following a major hurricane that destroyed the city in 1900. Now, FEMA's well-documented inefficiencies are the inevitable result of centralizing control over something as complex as disaster recovery and federal bureaucracy. Now, Ron Paul writes, when I served in Congress, I regularly voted against federal disaster aid for my district. And after the votes, I would hear the angry constituents, many of whom would later tell me that after dealing with FEMA, they agreed that Texas would be better off without federal help. Now, let me stop there, because he's absolutely right. The outpouring of charity alone is enough to see us through. You know, even as far back as, I'll give you an example, in the 19th century, Johnstown, Pennsylvania had one of the worst floods in the history of the United States. I mean, it wiped out towns off the map, Johnstown being one of them. And that disaster, you know, of course, made all the newspapers. And the outpouring of charity and the donations that came in were so much. People donated so much food, so much clothing, building materials, money, that the food was literally rotting on the trains because it couldn't get there fast enough because there were the trains were backed up. They couldn't get them in the cities into the towns fast enough to rebuild, to all these people. There was so much that came from it. And we see that today, where there's an outpouring of just unbelievable charity, and places come together and communities come together in a way that the federal government just can't duplicate. And when they get involved, they basically stop that from happening, that gelling, and people just go to their government god and they get their assistance after going through a bunch of red tape and BS, because believe me, it's not easy. And it's not just, free money. Oh, you got to work for it. There's no doubt about it. Not to mention the fact that, you basically give the government control over your life at that point because it's a disaster area. And if you take a look at some of the executive orders associated with FEMA, the government can basically take over and seize everything and take families and split them up into working communities, and they can assign jobs, and they take over every area of life and have the power to do so. FEMA is one of the most powerful agencies in the federal government. It's unbelievable what they can do and what power they wield. But it's also unbelievable how much money is wasted through the bureaucracy itself and the inefficiency. States, local communities are much better suited to handle these things. I mean, is it a lot? Absolutely. Does it take a lot of resources? Absolutely. But the outpouring of charity, instead of sending it to the Red Cross, right? Now, the Red Cross, I'm not knocking you as an organization, but when 90 cents out of every dollar goes towards the overhead expenses and only 10 cents get to the people themselves, then that's an issue. I mean, the Red Cross needs to be looked at. You want a good model for charity? Look at the Salvation Army. The Salvation Army CEO gets paid $18,000 a year. Think about that. What's the Red Cross's CEO get paid? Compare the two. Look at the good works that both of them do. The difference is, with the Salvation Army, the money actually gets to the people. So, things to think about. But certainly, government being involved is not a good thing, okay? Not a good thing. And sometimes it's better for people to come together and solve the problems themselves, just like we did prior to 1979. And I think that by doing that, the world, or our country, would be a lot stronger and a lot less divided. I'm Joe Joseph. This was thedailysheeple.com's News Shot. Feel free to comment below and visit our website at thedailysheeple.com. Have a great day, everybody.